Hey Alana, how's it going? Thank you for coming in, zooming in for this interview. I'm Brittany. I'm the Education Officer of Speech Pathology Student Society, and this little interview here is a dedication to Huntington's Disease Awareness Month. The specific awareness day is going to be May 22nd, so mark that down on your calendars. And we've got Alana here. So could you tell everyone why we're doing this interview today?
Yeah. So I guess the first and most obvious reason why I'm sitting here with you, Brittany, is that my dad has Huntington's disease. So this is probably something that's pretty close to my heart and me personally. First of all, I want to acknowledge that I'm not claiming to speak for people who have Huntington's disease. I'm not symptomatic or anything like that, and I'm very aware of like able-bodied privilege and all that sort of thing. So I'm only here to talk about my own insights as a child of someone with Huntington's disease, because I think that's still valuable for people to hear about. So why did I decide to do this video? I'm so conscious of like oversharing. I feel like this is quite a personal thing to talk about, and I'm kind of like, oh, what will people think that I'm talking about this? But I think I've decided that it's so important to talk about the things that happen to you. And I sort of like to think about Chadwick Boseman. So he had colorectal cancer, I believe, for 4 years and never told anyone, did all the Marvel movies and all of this sort of stuff, and sort of, his close family knew and nobody else knew. And I remember when he died last year, there was some sort of discourse around the fact that talking about, any sort of disease or thing that you might be going through isn't any less noble than going through it and not saying anything. So I think that's really true. Like, there is a nobility in talking about the things that you're going through and being honest about them. So I think there are a lot of stigmas associated with progressive neurological diseases, which is what Huntington's disease is. And I think we can often find them quite confronting. Just the sort of manifestations of them, that you might be seeing things like drooling or, strange body postures and that sort of stuff. And we can find that really confronting. And I think the only way to make it less confronting is to talk about it. I'm interested in creating a sort of a better and more accepting world for people to have this disease in. And, outside of access to quality healthcare and, legislation against discrimination, I think the best way we have to do that is to talk about it, have these sorts of conversations, and be really unflinching about the realities of it, which you will see that I am. I'm kind of straight to the point and blunt.
Well, wow, that's very noble thing for you to do, to talk about this. It's also very inspirational to hear how passionate you are in trying to create an environment with no stigma around progressive neurological disease or people with them. And I think this interview is going to be a great step in creating this world, a great first step, great contribution from your part. But we have to establish what Huntington's disease is for some of our students or some of the people who are watching who don't really know. So could you give us a little bit of an overview on what Huntington's is?
Yeah, of course. So as I said, it's a progressive neurological disease. So we think about these as, they're progressive. They're always getting worse over time. Neurological, affecting the brain, the nervous system. The thing about Huntington's disease is that it doesn't start sort of affecting people, giving them symptoms until they're in their middle age. So sort of 30s, 40s, 50s, which makes it sort of a bit of a different disease in that sense. It's pretty rare. I have some stats here that it affects 4 to 8 people per 100,000. So technically that means rare, but it means it's probably not as well heard of or talked about as things like Parkinson's disease and maybe just sort of general dementias and things like that. It's a little bit less heard of, I think.
How does this affect language, speech, and swallowing, since a lot of our audience members are in the speech pathology master's degree? So it'd be good to know.
Yeah. So let me think. So with language, you might be seeing things such as difficulties with word finding, and also things like reading and writing are going to be pretty tricky. When you think about speech, Huntington's disease is generally characterized by what we call hyperkinetic dysarthria. So that's just a specific type of dysarthria, but we're thinking about things like not being able to move your lips and articulators correctly to get in the right positions, difficulties with, I guess, breath support and coordination and things like that as well. I guess probably a big part of it is going to be that cognitive communication and those higher level language things. Something that I've definitely noticed is sort of difficulty like following a conversation. If there's a lot of people around and they're talking, it can be hard for people to sort of follow that and be engaged in that sort of discourse. And it's also important to think about the effect of cognition, the effect that cognition might have on language. So if you're having memory difficulties, the way that you interact with other people is going to be altered. So, you know, if you have memory difficulties, you might not remember that you've asked the same question. So there might be that repeated asking of questions and things like that. And of course, one of the really big things in this disease is swallowing and difficulties with swallowing. That swallowing difficulty, that aspiration pneumonia is generally the cause of death. So that's a pretty big one.
In relation to your dad, have you seen kind of changes in his daily routine or his lifestyle because of these changes in his speech language communication skills and also swallowing?
Yeah, definitely. So at the moment, my dad is retired, but he sort of had to retire because it wasn't really feasible for him to be driving himself to work and doing things like that. I guess the biggest impact that it has on his daily functioning probably isn't that related to communication. That's definitely there, but for me, the big thing is a sort of rigidity in thinking, and I guess a really strong adherence to routines. So we have a really strict routine at home here. Things have to happen at really specific times of the day and in specific orders, and it's not really feasible to do things outside of that order or that sort of stuff. And I think that really impacts everybody quite a lot. For example, all our meals are always sort of at the same time each day. And I find that he can have difficulty coming to a meal before it's that time. So I've seen him look at his watch before and go, it's 4:29, I can't come inside for an afternoon cup of tea yet because it's not 4:30. So it's really rigid, and I find that to be really difficult sometimes, but that's okay. I guess with regards back to then communication, I think it can really lead to a lot of isolation. So as I said at the beginning, people don't know what to do with these sorts of diseases. They don't know how to react when someone that they know really well sort of changes and isn't that same person anymore. So I think there's that lack of understanding, that can mean that perhaps people who were friends before don't want to hang out as much. And I think that's really sad. And part of, again, why I'm doing this, I want to talk about it. I want people to not feel uncomfortable or afraid of maybe saying the wrong thing, or how to act around someone who they once knew so well and they're not the same anymore. So I think probably, yeah, that effect of not being able to communicate with people in the way that they used to would be sort of leading to then that sort of isolation. I think that's a really big thing as well.
That's a very interesting point that you brought up about people feeling hesitant to enter into a conversation with the person with the progressive neurological disorder, or with HD specifically, or about HD. So I was wondering, do you have any experiences, positive or negative experiences, where you've gotten into a conversation that could have gone better, or conversations that went well when it comes to HD? Just so people can, when they do, enter into a conversation, or want to enter into a conversation, they're able to do it, confidently, comfortably, and without feeling like they need to tread over it, or without accidentally insulting or making negative assumptions.
So do you mean talking to a person with HD or talking to a person about HD?
Either or.
Okay. I think with talking to a person with HD, I've definitely found like my speech pathology training has really come in handy over the past year or so. I think it's definitely made me so much more understanding, so much more patient, to ask questions, but ask them in a way that isn't confusing, or, provides that, I guess, like providing, closed choices and saying, do you want this or this? Or with conversations about HD, I don't think that I'm an expert in that at all. I mean, I'm here, I've started this conversation, but I still find it a really difficult thing to talk about sometimes, especially, it's easier with some people than with others. But I think just the more that we do it, the easier it will get. I'm not sure that I have any really specific tips in that sense. Just the conversation needs to be had, I think.
In terms of family dynamics now, so how is your relationship with your dad, I guess, in terms of roles and all of those things? Family roles changed after your dad was diagnosed with HD, or maybe symptoms of his HD have worsened?
Yeah, no, and I think you definitely touched on that in the question there, that it is that sort of role reversal. I feel a little bit more like a parent and him like a child, which isn't good. Like, I know that's not good. Like, when you're that, what's it called? I can't remember. Elder speak. Yeah, because I feel like I use that a lot, because that's just what it feels like. It's like I have to be the responsible one who's like, okay, you've got to do this now, which is difficult to adjust to, I think. And I think also I'm pretty young, like I'm 23. I think lots of people go through this sort of thing that I'm going through, but when they're much older. So I am aware of that it's, I feel like I sort of, just ended being a kid and then immediately was like this new role. And I think that's difficult to come to terms with. But it is what it is. The other thing I was going to say is, I think, and I've touched on this a little bit, but like, I know through this course, I know like the right way to talk to somebody, and I know like the right way to be understanding and all of that sort of clinical stuff, but I'm not my dad's speech pathologist. I'm his daughter. And so I think sometimes I feel a bit bad that I have to be in that role all of the time, and I have to be perfect all the time. But I really, look, obviously I don't have to be, but I think I sometimes get stuck in that. And that's an interesting thing to navigate, finding the lines between being a speech pathologist and having that knowledge and being a daughter and being like, well, sometimes you're just going to get annoyed when you get asked the same question over and over again. Like you're not going to be perfect at it all of the time. You're going to get angry. You're going to get frustrated. And that's just how it is. That's the nature of, I guess, caring for someone.
What's the best thing about being a caregiver for your dad?
I think I'm just really thankful for the relationship that I have with him now. I think there was definitely a period of time before his diagnosis when perhaps his cognition was changing, and I wasn't very understanding, and I didn't sort of know what was going on, and I found it really hard to communicate and interact with him. But that knowing, I think, really shifted something, and I'm now very thankful for the relationship that we have. I think that most people probably take their parents for granted, and I don't. I'm very aware of the gift of each day, which is a very lame thing to say. But I think, there's always moments where you go, oh my God, I'm so frustrated. Like, this is really hard. But I think at the end of most days, like I'm pretty thankful for the relationship that I have, and I know how lucky I am to have him here with me. But I do want to add a little caveat in here that I try to look at the positives because I think it's a way of coping, to think about what might be a positive in this situation. But I think that there is absolutely no obligation to anybody who is in a shitty situation to find positives and to find meaning in it. Like, I think there's a real way of looking at the world that it's like, oh, this terrible thing has happened to you. Are you going to find meaning in it? You don't have to. There doesn't have to be any sort of meaning in it. It might just be a shit thing and you just have to deal with it. So, yeah, I think that's all I have to say.
Well, thank you so much for joining this interview. I learned a lot personally, and hopefully those who are watching also learn about HD, become more aware of what HD is, and get a little more insights on the more personal side of people who are affected with HD through this interview with Alannah. So thank you very much, Alannah, and thank you for joining us.
Thanks for having me.